if your family name is Collins, Gibson, Goins, Bunch, or this video is about you. There is a ridge in East Tennessee where, for 200 years, the people living on top of it could not be classified. Census takers went up and came back down with a different answer every single time. One census called them white. Which one do you think was correct? The next one called them free persons of color. The one after that called them white again. Same families, same houses, same ridge. And if you think that is just sloppy paperwork, here is the first thing you have to understand: what that one word in that one column actually decided. Whether you could vote, whether you could testify in court against a white man, whether your marriage was legal, whether your children could inherit your land. These were and they were never what any of us were told they were. That is what a laboratory finally proved, and it is where this video is going. Nobody agrees on where the word came from, and until recently, nobody could agree on where the people came from either. For a century and a half, they had an answer of their own, and they gave it to every official who asked. We are Portuguese. Portuguese. In the mountains of Appalachia, hundreds of miles from any ocean. Does that sound like something you would invent about yourself? Hold on to that, because the reason they said it is the whole point of this story. 3 answers have been given over 2 centuries. The first one they gave themselves, Portuguese. The second came from historians, Turkish. The third is the one you have probably assumed yourself, Cherokee. I am going to take all 3 apart, in that order, and then show you what a laboratory found instead. Because in 2012, a genetic study finally tested those claims properly. What came back was not Portuguese. It was not Turkish, and it was not Native American either. And here is the part that took me a while to understand. The answer the DNA gave does not make them liars. By the end of this, you will see why the story they told was the most rational thing they could possibly have said. Start with what is not in dispute. On Ridge in County, Tennessee, and in a scatter of nearby counties in Virginia and Kentucky, there were families who did not fit the categories the American South ran on. They were darker than their white neighbors and lighter than their black ones. They farmed the land on the mountain, the land nobody else wanted. What does that tell you about where they stood before anybody wrote a single word down? And they carried a small, tight set of surnames that show up again and again in the records. Collins, Gibson, Goins, Bunch. If one of those names is in your family, pay attention to the next 10 minutes, because the reason your ancestors may have moved or changed how they spelled that name is probably in this story. Now, where did they come from? That is the question everybody has been arguing about since the 1840s, and there have been 3 serious answers. The first answer is the one the community itself gave. Shipwrecked Portuguese sailors, stranded on the Carolina coast, who walked inland and married into the mountains. It is a good story. It even has a plausible mechanism behind it, because Portuguese and Spanish ships really did wreck along that coast, and survivors really did end up living with coastal tribes. But look for the paperwork and it disappears. No ship, no names, no parish record on either side of the Atlantic. Nothing but the claim itself, repeated with total consistency for 150 years. And consistency is interesting, isn't it? A rumor drifts. Families embroider. This story did not drift. Everybody gave the same answer, in the same words, to every official who asked. The second answer is stranger, and it got much more attention than it deserved. Turks. The argument goes like this. In 1586, Francis Drake raided Spanish ports in the Caribbean and freed several hundred captives, among them Turkish and Moorish galley slaves. He carried them north and, the theory says, left them on the Carolina coast. Same coast, same century as the lost colony at Roanoke. You can see why it caught on. It is a wonderful story. It also has the same problem. There is no evidence any of those people stayed, and there is no genetic signal in the modern population that points anywhere near Anatolia. Both theories share something, and it took researchers a long time to notice it. Both of them place the origin far away, across an ocean, in a country nobody in Tennessee could check. The third answer is the one most people assume today. Native American ancestry, probably Cherokee, mixed with white settlers. This one at least has geography on its side. These families lived in and around Cherokee country, so contact is not just plausible, it is certain. So why does it fail? But when the DNA came back, Native American ancestry was barely there. A trace in some families, absent in most. Not nothing, but nowhere near enough to be the answer. So the community's own story was wrong, the exotic theory was wrong, and the sensible modern assumption was wrong too. What does that leave? In 2012, a team led by researcher Estes published a study in the Journal of Genetic Genealogy. They did something nobody had done properly before. They tested the male line and the female line separately. You need to know why that matters, because it is the whole key. Your Y chromosome comes down your father's 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 line, unbroken. Your mitochondrial DNA comes down your mother's 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 line, unbroken. Two separate threads, and they told two completely different stories. The mothers were overwhelmingly European. The fathers were overwhelmingly sub-Saharan African. Read that again, because it is not a statement about race. It is a statement about specific people. Somewhere in Colonial Virginia, African men and European women had children together, and those children became a population. And now the timing tells you the rest. This was the 1600s, before slavery hardened into the system it later became. African men and Irish and English women worked the same fields under the same indentures, and they married each other. Why does that window matter so much? Because it closed. Then the colonies started passing laws against exactly that. 1662, Virginia. 1691, a law banning such marriages outright and exiling anyone who entered one. So imagine you are one of those families in Virginia in about 1700. You have a farm, you have children, and a law has just been passed that makes your marriage a crime and your children a legal problem. What do? You do not fight it because you cannot. You go where nobody is going to come and check. West up into the ridges, onto land so poor that no official has any reason to walk up there. And you bring one thing with you that matters more than anything you can carry. You bring an explanation for why you look the way you look. Here is the turn, and it is the reason this story is worth your time. Portuguese was not a family legend. Portuguese was a legal category. Under the law of the southern states, a person of Portuguese descent was white. A person of African descent was not. And the difference between those two words was the difference between two completely different lives. Vote, testify, marry, hold land. Every one of those depended on which side of that line a clerk decided you were standing on. And in 1834, Tennessee rewrote its constitution and stripped free people of color of the vote they had previously held. Not a thread in the abstract. A right taken in one document in their lifetime. So the Portuguese story was not vanity, and it was not confusion. It was a shield, held up by people who understood exactly what would happen if they lowered it. And they were right to hold it. In 1872, in a Tennessee courtroom, a lawyer named Lewis Shepard defended a woman's inheritance by arguing in front of the court that her people were of ancient Mediterranean stock. He won. A woman kept her property because a court accepted the Portuguese story. Ask yourself what you would have said, standing in that room with your children's land in the balance. There is a detail from the researchers that I have not been able to put down since I read it. When the results were taken back to the families, the reaction was not shock. In family after family, the older generation already knew or half knew and had simply never said it out loud. One descendant put it plainly, the grandmothers knew. They just knew what it cost to say it. That is what 150 years of a careful answer actually is. Not a myth that got out of hand. A decision renewed at every kitchen table in every generation about what was safe to tell a stranger with a notebook. What would you have told him? On a map, the whole thing is one short line. Out of Tidewater, Virginia, west into the mountains, onto the worst land available, and then 200 years of staying put. They were not hiding in the mountains from the law in the way an outlaw hides. They were living in the one place where the law was not curious enough to follow. Now the part most videos skip, and the part you should want from anyone telling you a story like this. The study did not test everyone. It tested families who came forward, and that is a self-selected group. There are almost certainly lines with different results that nobody has sequenced. I cannot tell you the names of the first couples. The records that would have held them were never kept, because the whole point of the system was that those unions were not supposed to exist. And I cannot tell you that every family on that ridge shares one origin. Was never a tribe. It was a label applied from outside, mostly as an insult to anybody who did not fit. But the pattern is not in dispute. European mothers, African fathers, Colonial Virginia, a migration west, and a story told for 2 centuries that was chosen rather than believed. So come back to that census taker walking up the ridge, writing a different word in the same column every 10 years. He was not confused. He was being managed. The families on that mountain were reading him, deciding what he needed to hear and giving him exactly that. Not lying, surviving, and doing it well enough that the truth waited 300 years for a laboratory to finally say it out loud. If Collins, Gibson, Goins, Bunch, or is in your family tree, you may be looking at the end of that migration without knowing it. Tell me in the comments if one of those names is yours, and whether your family ever explained where it came from. I read every one of those, because that is where the next piece of this always